Just a second. I do the connection between Zoom and YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Few seconds. I will write in chat. We are live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 12th episode of our English series of Serpask. My name is Dido Grigorov, and I'm head of SEO for Serpact with almost 16 years of experience in SEO and focus on technical SEO, semantic SEO, SEO and SEO strategies, and Google patterns. Today we have a really great guest. Totally dedicated to the loading speed improvement, and his name is Doc Sheldon. Hello, Doc.
Hello, everybody.
We're very happy to see you here. With nearly 14 years of professional writing under his belt and 13 years of constantly studying the complexities of SEO, combining his efforts between SEO and content strategy seemed to be a logical path. Now, Doc is a founder, owner of Interesting Value SEO, and co-owner, publisher of Search News Central, co-founder, owner of Top Shelf Copy. And his specialties include site speed, website security, and on-page technical SEO as patients. Doc goes to great lengths to stay on top of the daily changes in the search, the newest developments in tools and techniques, and any news that may help Doc better serve his clients. So this is a very, very brief presentation of Doc. Let's start talking about you as a person, and tell us, how did you get into SEO? How did you start with SEO?
Well, take a quick step back before I actually got into SEO. I was a business consultant for about 20 years, but the nature of my business meant I was on the road for 6 months out of the year. And I had a young teenage daughter, and I wanted to start spending more time at home. So I looked at early retirement, and finally, at about 55 years old, I decided, okay, I'm going to retire early. And I did. And about the same time, the economy went to crap. And I decided, okay, I'm going to have to go back to work. So I didn't want to go back on the road. And I had a history in marketing and publishing. So I thought, well, perhaps getting into writing. I've always wanted to write a book. I get back into writing, and I looked, okay, there was an opportunity to make some money online at copywriting. And then I saw this thing I'd never heard of called SEO copywriting, and I had to start investigating what is this SEO. And I found it so interesting that I started paying more attention to that than to the actual copywriting. I did do some writing just to bring some money in. But I was spending more of my time studying SEO. I got involved with a group of some colleagues, David Harry and Terry Van Horn's group, the SEO Dojo. Started spending a lot of time in there and found some great friendships and learning opportunities in there. And so I studied SEO for about 1.5 years before I ever started actually practicing it. And it kind of went from there. I have gotten to the point now where my partner now runs the Top Shelf, the content agency, where I handle intrinsic value. And I do some editing, but I don't get involved much on the content side. But that's I found it fascinating because it's always changing. You know, yeah. Between Google and Yandex and Bing and there's always something new. So I find it fascinating to try to stay on top of that stuff. And over the last few years, I've focused more rather than organic. I now focus more on the technical side and security and site speed. Even before mobile first became an issue, were interesting to me. So that's where most of my focus is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what was your first challenge in SEO you have experienced in your practice?
I'm sorry, my first challenge?
Yeah.
What, in terms of the type of problems?
yeah, exactly.
My first biggest challenge, I guess, was one of the larger sites that I had early on was on GoDaddy hosting.
Whoa!
And which that's an adventure in and of itself. that lasted about 4 months, just trying to get the site satisfactorily migrated and functional again. There was so much custom structure in there, so much custom coding that GoDaddy had done for them that they would not turn over, and we had to reverse engineer it and redesign some of it, and it was a major learning experience. That was, at that point in time, I still by no means was a coder. You know, I was able to cut and paste a script. If somebody who knew what they were looking at could say, yes, this will do what you need, I could copy and paste it. But that was about the extent of it. And I learned quite a bit. And I realized then that not knowing HTML was like trying to run a race with one leg. So I started studying HTML, and it was a nightmare, but it was a great learning experience. And it also taught me, now any new client comes to me, if I see they're on GoDaddy, I either tell them, we're going to change you to a different host, or you're going to find a new consultant, because I will not.
So GoDaddy is like a nightmare for you?
The hosting, yeah. I mean, they're great as a registrar, but their hosting, it was a nightmare. And I have a couple of other platforms that I'm not wild about, but they were mostly simply because I didn't like the limited control that I had. But GoDaddy was one of the worst experiences I've ever had.
Yeah. So 2 more questions before going straight to our main topic. We have seen you that you very often comment and participate in conversation on Facebook about semantic SEO, Google patents, or any specific things around how Google assess the content and all. What is your experience on this side? We have seen some really, really good and very knowledgeable and valuable comments posted by you.
Well, you know, I early on, when I was studying SEO, before I started practicing, I spent a lot of time on forums.
Mm-hmm.
And you can pick a lot of brains there. And of course, you have to be careful what you read. You know, there's people on the internet can say anything they like, and they can pretend to have all sorts of knowledge and experience and find out they've been doing it for 3 months.
Yes, exactly.
I found out that I made some friendships, and I learned how to differentiate between the good information and the bad. And you get bored with forums after a while, because you know you learn only just so much. But I learned the value of listening to others and having some good open discussions about things. And I was lucky. I met a few people in those forums that I'm still close friends with, who were open-minded enough. They would give me feedback. They weren't impatient because I was ignorant. They were willing to share and teach. And I found that very rewarding. And so when I got tired of forums, or felt I had learned as much there as I was going to, then I started looking for private communities, and of course blogs and Facebook groups, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I've gotten to know some of these people, although I've never met the vast majority of them face to face. You get to know people pretty well when you have a lot of interaction with them. And I've found some people that are very knowledgeable, that enjoy sharing. And that's a philosophy that I enjoy as well. You know, a lot of these people helped me over the years to an extent that I can never pay them back. So my philosophy is pay it forward. I enjoy working, you know, mentoring younger SEOs and helping them learn. And it's just I can't pay it back, so I pay it forward. And I still enjoy some of those groups. Like I said, the SEO Dojo is one that I'm still active in, and I've made some very good friendships in there. I've been participating a lot with Bill Slosky on the Bill and Ammons Bogus Hangout lately. And I enjoy that because Bill is a fountain of knowledge. And he's also very willing to share and teach. Ammon Johns, his cohort there is, he's forgotten more than I will ever know about SEO. And he's been around since since the beginning, you know, and worked with some very, very tough niches. So you can't help but learn something knowledgeable, you know, something worthwhile by just spending 5 minutes with him. So that sort of thing. Steve Gerengsler, my partner in Mentors on Tap, is another one one of the best SEOs I know, and very low key. Nobody knows who he is, but it's because he's out there doing it rather than writing about it. I was trying to do some branding, you know, so I was starting an agency, so I did a lot of writing, and that was not the direction that some people took. But that to me has been the most valuable aspect of it: interacting with others and finding those people that are knowledgeable and willing to share it.
Very good, Steph. Yeah, and if we forget for a second, you're a loading speed specialist in SEO. What is the next most favorite thing in SEO for you, or things maybe? I don't know.
Well, I'm also interested in site security, particularly because WordPress, which is my primary source of work, is very, very subject to attacks. It's open source, and hackers love going after WordPress sites, and there's plenty of them to go after. But I'm still learning a lot of the security, and I have a couple of other contacts who are very knowledgeable in it. Shout out to Jim Morris with Sailfish. He's extremely knowledgeable, and he's taught me a lot over the years we've known each other. But I'm still very early in my learning on the security. And recently I started doing a lot of work with GDPR compliance. And of course, you got the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, which is very, very similar to GDPR. New York is about to pass one that's going to be even more stringent, probably more stringent than GDPR from all indications. Nevada is in the same thing. Several states in the United States are ready, and the federal Congress is even, there's a couple of bills being prepared to present before the Congress for a federal standard that is supposedly going to be very similar to GDPR. So I've been putting a lot of work in on that. And I think, the first time I saw the GDPR, it scared me because it seems so demanding.
Yeah.
But then I realized when I get into it, that they're trying to write a bill there that will cover all potential scenarios. My first glance, I thought, my God, I got to do all this? Well, no, you don't. Most sites don't. If you're Amazon or Facebook, yeah, you do. But for most of us, very little of it actually will apply. It's basically just the parts that are common sense and common decency. Somebody shares their data with you, they deserve to have you protect it. And there are certain criteria, and it's the right thing to do. So I don't have a problem with GDPR in terms of most of my clients, because I do most of my work is with SMBs. I don't do a lot of large enterprise stuff. So I think it's an interesting area for me, and I've been highly focused in GDPR for the last several months. That security and speed. And of course, responsiveness. I don't think that there's any excuse for any site not being mobile friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the 4 areas that I focus mostly on, and you'll notice they're all basically technical. They're under the covers, as opposed to I don't do any of my PPC work. When we pull in PPC work, Steve does that because that's what he's really good at. And I don't do much organic. We do some content stuff, but I like the technical. So basically anything that's under the cover, under the hood, is what I enjoy working on.
Okay, let's start with our main topic today, the loading speed, the site speed, improvement of a website. But before jumping into the different aspects, let's talk a little bit about the importance of the loading speed. Why do you think, and there are so many rumors on the web, especially on Twitter or Facebook or you name it, about the loading speed and its impact on the rankings of a website. Do you believe that the loading speed is impacting the rankings really, or it depends on the niche or the phrase? or any specific queries or cluster of queries? What's your opinion here?
Well, if you recall, when Google first started talking about loading speed being an issue, they said early on, this is not, well, they didn't say at the very beginning, they had to come out and clarify later, that if you're 3 seconds versus 2 seconds, don't expect that to make a big difference in your rankings between two sites. But if you're out there in a 17 to 20 second page load, yes, it's going to affect your rankings. But more importantly, I think we see impact because of the impatience of the standard user. We see impact from the users. If a mobile site particularly is taking 7 or 8 seconds to load, you're going to lose people. People, they just don't have the patience. And there are faster sites, or there are many other choices to look at. Even if you're the fastest of 5 or 6 potential sites to visit, if you're taking 7 or 8 seconds, they're going to have to visit the other 7 or 8 sites before they're going to finally give up and come back to you. So you're going to lose business or readers or conversions. Yes. So I think that the biggest impact is for your client base to not lose them. And the other aspect that I think that some people don't pay enough attention to, there's a psychological aspect. Just like when you're building a sales funnel, any conversion funnel, every single step in that funnel is an opportunity to either, you're setting the mood. You're either making them satisfied subconsciously with how easy and fast this was, or how well that your site search, for instance, showed them exactly what they're looking for, or how it was only a one-step click-through process rather than 3. This affects their mood and makes them more receptive to the next step in the funnel. So everything that you can do to make that process all the way through your funnel easier and smoother and faster is going to be beneficial to your conversion. Yeah. So, nothing anymore. Early on in SEO, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you could do a thing that would have a dramatic impact. You could change your titles or change your, at that time, the keyword meta descriptions. You could do things that would show you an immediate impact. That no longer happens. Now you have to do, as they say, all the things. You've got to do many improvements to have a discernible impact. And I think that speed is one of them, and most particularly for mobile. Now, when Google came out and made their mobile first declaration, it becomes even more critical, because now they're looking at your site in terms of how fast it loads for mobile. So, if you're not responsive and you're slow, you're not going to be a player, period.
Yeah, absolutely. And about the loading speed, a lot of people are talking about the connection, a really big and strong connection between loading speed and user experience. If we just forget for a second what you said, which is absolutely very, very low. How do you think the loading speed is connected to the user experience?
Well, again, I think satisfaction is going to be the biggest thing. If they feel like their feet are stuck in the mud trying to navigate their way through your site, and every time they click on a link, they're waiting 5 or 6 seconds, the frustration builds. So they may get to a point where they just decide this will probably be easier someplace else, and they'll go back to the search engine and try to find a different resource. Or they may force themselves to continue with the process, but they've taken on a negative mindset, so they're less receptive. They're more resistant.
Yeah.
So it makes the ability to convince them at every level that much more difficult. So, user experience is critical. Excuse me.
Do you believe that there is a connection between the number of elements on a page and its loading speed? This is something that is kind of a myth on the web. Let's break it.
I'm sorry, the number of what on the page?
The number of elements of the page.
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say, yeah, there's a connection. I would say it's indirect. It's not it's not the sort of thing that I think you can actually change and expect to see an immediate impact, because the impact to page load for different requests may be very slight, or it could be great. You know, some requests, for instance, one that a lot of people use, Google Fonts. Okay, that's a very quick response, but it's a very lengthy download. Okay. So you know, adding that request to your page really doesn't have much of an impact. But it if you're using 2 of those fonts and you're downloading the entire base, that has a tremendous impact. So you know, it's an indirect thing.
Also, a lot of people started talking about it's because of the new Google PageSpeed Insights tool. About DOM objects and requests, problems and issues related to the loading speed. What's your opinion on these type of issues? Are they really critical, and what we can do to improve the loading speed when it comes to these type of issues?
That's you know, I do think that that's something that needs to be minimized as much as possible. It's not always easy to do. It depends on the nature of the page, obviously. For instance, this is one of the areas where when you start combining your objects, just like you combine your JavaScript and your CSS calls, you can combine these things and achieve a lot of benefits sometimes. Just like back in the old days, we would use sprites a lot of times to try to speed things up. And I think that can have an impact. So, you know, you definitely want to watch that, just like you want to watch the number of calls. You know, I recently added a plugin at the client's request to a page. We had 36 calls on a speed check. I added this plugin, and it went to 118 calls. 118 requests from 36 for one plugin. Now that when you see something, you know, anytime you add a particular request and you see a big jump, or you add a particular function, you see a big jump in calls, you need to get down into the waterfall and see what's really happening. And what I found was there was a loop, a faulty design in the plugin. It was calling the same thing over and over and over again. The longer the longer TTBF I had on that every test, the more calls it had, because it was calling 3 and 4 times per second. So that was a weird thing that was caused by a faulty plugin design, but it had a tremendous impact. That one plugin was adding 18 seconds page load by adding 80 more or 70 some more calls to it. You know, obviously that's a direct impact. Now imagine what that impact would have had if we had not noticed that and not tested it and had gone to somebody on their mobile phone they would have lost every visitor they had from that point. So, you know, yes, it can have a difference, but it isn't always black and white. It depends on how it's being handled. You know, there are a few people out there designing WordPress plugins, for instance, and add-ons, you know, Chrome add-ons and things of that sort that are very, very good at what they do, and they're very speed conscious. They're very bandwidth conscious. They're trying to minimize the impact, and those are the ones I look for. You know, because sometimes you're like Google Fonts. You know, it's a great resource, but most people that use Google Fonts are using only 1 or 2 of their fonts, and they're downloading the entire package every time. Google has done a fantastic job of compressing that package and making it as fast as it can reasonably be. Yeah. But why would you download the entire alphabet when all you want is the letter A?
Yeah, even John Miller, I remember, told us that Google is trying to cache and compress the CSS and JavaScript resources as much as possible during the process of rendering. And that's why I wanted to confirm what you said, that if we can make it much more easier for Google, let's do it.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of things that you can do there to make it easier for them. One of the things I think it's important from the search engine standpoint is simply to keep it as clean as possible. For instance, minimizing, compressing your files. There is an indistinct or perhaps indirect impact to your crawl budget as well, with how fast these things will load. So, the bots are pretty quick, but if they're having to render things that are slow, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, or there may be too many.
Yeah. They're only going to spend just so much time, and there's a lot of discussion and none of us really know, how does the bot limit its time? Is it the number of steps? Is it the amount of time? Is it the amount of bytes? What determines how long it will crawl? None of us really know outside of Google. I like to take the worst case approach and say, okay, what's the most I can possibly do to impact my worst case situation? And I want to make it, like you say, as easy for the search engines as possible. Google obviously is our biggest target because they're the majority of most of our marketing effort. But fortunately, the things that Google looks at are not that different from the things that Bing looks at, or the things that Yandex looks at, or even Baidu if you play in that field. So, they're looking for the same sort of thing. So if we're working to satisfy Google, we're probably not hurting ourselves with the others.
Yeah, absolutely right. And thanks for the great explanation, actually. Share with us the most common problems when it comes to the loading speed in, let's say this year. What are the most common problems you experience and you resolve on a regular basis this year when it comes to improving the loading speed of a website?
The biggest problem I see with a new client is usually images. Okay, they're trying to display a 300 pixel wide image, so they upload a 2400 pixel wide, 6 megabyte image, and they don't downsize the file size. They don't scale it to the size that they want to display, or you don't. If you're displaying something as a thumbnail and as a 300 wide and as a 500 wide, WordPress core, for instance, does a pretty good job of extracting a thumbnail from a 300 or 400 pixel image. It's not that big a deal. So you don't necessarily have to upload 3 different things to your media library. If you upload a 500, you're probably going to be okay. But uploading a 3 megabyte image to display something like that is foolish. So, that images is the biggest area that I see. And then the fact that I see so many of them, they think that they're compressing images because they've loaded gzip. And gzip is great at compressing scripts. Your JavaScript and your CSS. It's not going to do, in fact, it's probably going to do more harm than good with an image. It's actually going to make the file somewhat larger in most instances. Yeah. So, things like Smush is a great plugin for image compression.
Smush, yeah.
And I think images is the biggest issue. Loading, sequencing, people, I think particularly users that, site owners who are not particularly technically oriented are a little leery to even look at if they're aware of the ability to do things like deferred loading. And and then they don't know that there's 2 different kinds. You've got conditional loading. You don't have to be a code monkey to do these things. There are plugins that will help you do these things.
Can you share some names of plugins besides Smush?
For images, I've tried several of them. That's the only one that I really like, to tell you the truth. I've been very pleased with Smush. There are some others that I have tested, and I just wasn't impressed, but I can't say that I analyzed them enough to be able to make a fair call, say this is a good one or not a good one. I would be hesitant to say that. I found Smush early in my search and was so pleased with it, I stuck with it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and what are your main tips for image optimization when it comes to the loading speed improvement? I mean, can you share some actionable advice to our audience? What to do and what to preserve?
For the entire page speed or just in images?
Just for images for now.
Well, for images, I would say, first of all, look at your file type. If you know, an SVG is beautiful because they're so small, but it's only really appropriate for things like logos. You're going to basically consider, you know, good, clean. There's no gradation. There's strictly a, you know, 3 or 4 colors in a ideally line art. You know, fantastic. But for images, for you know, for a portrait or a headshot, it won't work. So you're going to go to, then typically you're either going to look at a WebP, a JPEG, or a PNG. A PNG file is typically larger than JPEG, so unless you really need transparency, go with JPEG. Yeah, JPEG is lossy, but if you're working your images up properly, and particularly if you're starting with a high-res image, you can scale it down to what you need, and you're not going to lose that much. I think a lot of people forget the fact that every time you do something to a JPEG, regardless of what you've done to it, every time you save it, you lose some resolution.
Yeah, and
so
we see that many people are using PNG massively today, even for the thumbnails and so on. So this is not a good practice. If you, as you said, if you have a chance to use something with a background like JPEG, especially the white backgrounds, so go and use it so you can reduce the size of the file. If you need something without a background, then go and use PNG, but be more careful with that.
Yeah. The other thing that I see a lot of with images is a misunderstanding of resolution. You know, people are uploading 300, 600, even 1200 DPI images, and they don't understand that browsers aren't going to display that. Yeah. You know, 96 is the best DPI you're going to see through most browsers. You know, if you're selling images, if you're selling high resolution images, then your download file might be a 1200. That's fine, but that's a download file. What you're going to display, make it 96 DPI. Yeah, that's the most that you're going to get any benefit. So uploading a 300 DPI, which is going to make for a much larger file and a much slower download and display, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of bandwidth as well. And it's certainly a waste for your mobile users. And you know, increasingly we're seeing more and more, even for the type of site that were traditionally not considered typically something that a mobile user would go for. More and more people are sitting at home, and I mean, I'm sitting here in front of my desktop, and I got my phone here. There's many times I don't want to change any of my 3 monitors. I'll look up something on my phone.
Yes.
You know, so yes. It's just, you know, it needs to be understood. There are many things besides just smushing a photo to make it proper. Scaling, you know, to setting it up to approximately the size of what you're going to need. Sometimes if you're going to display one at 1500 pixels wide and another at 300 pixels wide, you're probably going to need to upload 2 versions of that to your media library.
Yeah. And what do you think about the hottest trends in 2019, the lazy loading of images?
In terms of, do I think that it's a good process? Certainly.
Yeah,
well,
and do you think it's a good practice?
I typically like to start loading them initially. I don't particularly want to wait until the user scrolls down unless I know that I'm going to be a fast load. Now, if I've got an optimized image, I can probably get away with it. But even if you're not looking for the images, you know, when you're on your phone particularly, if you're scrolling down to the page, let's say you want to get to the footer, you're looking for a privacy policy link, it's probably in the footer, okay? You're scrolling down, and all you're seeing is little empty boxes as you scroll.
Exactly, yes.
Does not, you don't care about those images, but it doesn't leave a good user impression on you.
Yeah, totally. That's why I'm asking you this question, because many people started to be frustrated with this kind of practice, especially on their mobile phones, because as you said, you see just a small or big box with a spinner, and you have to wait until all other images are loaded up to the, for example, the image on the bottom, and you see almost partially a blank page, which is not a good idea actually. So, but if we want to use lazy loading, what is your advice there? Maybe we have to tweak a little bit the loading speed of the of how fast the images are loading.
I think it's going to depend much upon what else you're doing. You know, it can vary, and of course, what's the site? You know, if this is a page that has got 16 images on it, for instance, a blog page, every single blog post has a hero image, and I've got 10 posts listed on my main blog page, then that's going to be a different situation than if I'm going into a post that has the hero image and one or two other images on the post. So typically I'm going to try to start loading the images immediately. I typically don't like lazy loading, but if they're very simple graphics, for instance, a screenshot of Google Analytics. Okay, it's not a portrait, it's not a highly detailed, it's not a heavy file size, then it's probably not going to be a concern, because it's still going to load in a couple hundred milliseconds. But if it's an image of let's say I'm a photographer and I'm showing, even if it's just a low resolution 300 pixel image of a scenery, that's going to be different. If they scroll down to that page and it just starts loading when they get there, even if it only takes a second and a half, that's going to have an impact on my conversion. It's going to impact the impression of the user. So I should have loaded that, initially on page load, so that it's ready when they get there.
Yeah, thank you. So let's continue to the next hot topic when it comes to the loading speed, and let's talk about the JavaScript and CSS resources. Many people started talking about them, about caching them, about minifying them, or maybe any other techniques like cleaning up the unnecessary CSS selectors, or loading any specific resources just on any particular pages, and preventing some other resources not to be loaded on any other pages when they are not needed. So what are the problems you see here, and what kind of approaches do you apply when it comes to make Google page speed insights to happy and Google respectively?
Well, this is one of those areas where I think that, going back to what I had said earlier, that it kind of plays along with many other aspects. For instance, combining CSS and JavaScript files is generally a good practice. Minification is definitely a good practice, because it means absolutely nothing to the search engine. It just speeds things up for the users. The search engine does not care about those white spaces. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're a developer trying to get in there and troubleshoot a problem, there are tools like deminification, online tools where you can drop it in there and deminify it rapidly so that it's easier to find what you're looking for. But it only has an impact on page load. It doesn't hurt the search engines in the least. But when you start looking at things like, again, and deferring comes into play too. One of the things that I look at with CSS is, first of all, is this CSS going to be used on several pages? Okay. Now my caching comes into play in a big way, because I don't want to download it 4 times when the user hits 4 pages. I want to download it once and play it out of cache. And if the aspect that's being modified on a particular display is, let's say, just text color or size, why would I download a whole script if that's going to be just that one item. Those are the kinds of things that I'll break out and put inline, because a line of inline CSS has essentially, such a negligible effect on page load that I don't care. I can do that 12 times and I won't care. It's going to add 60 milliseconds, So it's the sort of thing that I think when you start looking at combining and possibly breaking out into inline, very, very small snippets, it can, those things could have a big impact. Minification can definitely have an impact, and particularly I've seen some CSS files that were 1,400 lines, and literally there are tools that you can run this thing through, run the page through, and find out it was using, I think it was either 14 or 17 lines out of 1,300 that were used on that particular page. So I immediately broke that out and put it in line. It chopped several seconds off the page load because that was an internal page, but it was actually getting linked to from externally. So it was the first download of that script. It just made no sense at all. And you can defer your JavaScript. That can have a major impact. The JavaScript is really not typically a terribly slow type of file to download and implement. So it's usually going to be a benefit, with few exceptions that I've seen, where it's not a benefit to defer it and download it when the user scrolls down to that point. Make it a conditional.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that people were talking more and more about the size of the files of JavaScript and CSS. Do you think this plays a major role when it comes to the loading speed? For example, even the Google Page Speed Insights tool started showing us that, for example, just because JavaScript is X kilobytes or X megabytes large, this is slowing down the loading speed, let's say 1, 2, or 3 seconds, unfortunately. So what is your advice here?
Well, yeah, there are some that I have seen that were extremely large files. Where I normally see that is in things like a lot of custom WordPress themes. And in the theme, they're trying to offer the users 36 different options. And they think they're doing you a favor by consolidating all of the options, possible functions into one script. So you're downloading this massive file and you're only doing one thing. And there's a number of themes out there that do this, where you'll have a 3.2 megabyte CSS. Yeah, that's massive. This thing, it was like 4,000 lines. And if you call, for instance, there's some builders out there. Divi is one that I've used. Divi has a CSS file for, let's say, for the text size in a particular module. They have, if you're using this module, they have that CSS file that lets you set the text size. If you're using a different module, they have another almost identical, sometimes actually identical CSS file, okay? If you're using both those modules on the same page, you're downloading that same file twice, okay? It's 2 separate calls, 2 separate file names. And what makes this a real pain in the neck is from a modification standpoint, if you're trying to go in, if you're not familiar with Divi, you're trying to go in, you want to change, let's say, the text color, guess what? You're going to have to go to 16 different places to do it. It's not going to be in one script. So there, it becomes, from a developer standpoint, it becomes a real nightmare to have them all broken out. But a 5 or 6 line CSS file, it might as well be in line. It's very fast. So it's, in something like a Divi site, it's not worth trying to go in there and pull that little script apart and make it inline. It's not having a major impact on page speed. It's an issue from a modification standpoint, in my mind, but it's not slowing the page down. It's quite functional. It just seems, because that file isn't a big deal. So downloading it twice versus once, I've added 12 milliseconds, big deal. You know, it's I just don't think that enough attention gets paid to the real impact of script files to page load. And, you know, people thinking that they're doing you a favor by putting it all in one, no, they're not. You know, it needs to be from a functional standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
To a degree, I think the same is true with JavaScript, but to a much lesser degree. It doesn't happen nearly as often.
Okay, another hot question. We have started seeing it all over the web, especially with the plain and the pure templates actually of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the question is, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript or a PHP-based solution? What do you think is better? Do you believe that WordPress can achieve the same performance as a pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript website? And why?
You know, I'm going to really tick off some friends with this answer because I know they have very strong feelings to the opposite. I do think that a straight HTML site can be extremely sleek and very fast, okay? Probably faster than any WordPress site. If speed is the intent from both the WordPress developer's desk and from an HTML developer's desk, the HTML is probably going to be faster. However, how fast is necessary? I have yet to work on any WordPress site ever that I haven't been able to eventually get down to consistently load in 2 seconds or less. Not out of the box, obviously. It took a lot of tweaking and sometimes hours and hours of tweaking with some sites to really get them that quick. But it can be done. And if a site is loading in 1 second versus 2 seconds, I don't think that that's going to have an impact on either rankings or customer satisfaction. So at that point, 2 seconds or even 3 seconds is probably fast enough. So the difference is slight. And I've done e-commerce sites that were medium, you know, not large sites, but, you know, they had several hundred products, and I can still get them all to load in under 2 seconds consistently, regardless of the tool that I was using. Well, with the exception of Google's page load test speed, which is all over the map, but you know, they can be done. It's just but not out of the box. So HTML is certainly very, very fast, and you can do basically anything that you can do with the WordPress site. You obviously can do with HTML, and it's just it's a matter of preference. I think that WordPress has delivered something to the world at large that enabled an awful lot of people to get a site online, even if it's just a hobby blog, who would not be able to bring themselves to learn HTML in order to do it, or they wouldn't have been willing to try. So to me, WordPress deserves a major kudos for opening the doors to millions and millions of people who would not have ever had the opportunity if they had to learn HTML to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So I see we have 4 questions at the moment from our audience, and the audience is very active actually. So let's start with the first question right now. What are the most popular and most useful tools for page speed analysis in your opinion?
You know, when I'm looking at working on page speed, I never use one. I'll always run typically 3 tools multiple times, 3, 4, 5 times, because even if I'm using webpagetestorg, for instance, is one I use a lot. If I use that thing 5 times, I'll probably get at least 1 or 2 tests that are outliers. They'll be a second or so different from the others. gtmetrics.com is another that I use all the time. Lighthouse in the Chrome Developer Tool is great. Another one I've recently started using that I kind of like because I like the drill down data it gives you is the Sakuri load time tester. It's at performance.sakuri.net. That's a good one. Now, Page Speed Insights is not one I have been impressed with. I see more variety in consecutive tests with that than in any other tool. It might tell me 1.2 seconds and then 5.6 seconds and then 3.4 and then 11.2, all in a period of 4 rapid consecutive tests. And that just makes no sense. And that's without any big variance in time to first byte. Even on downloading a particular file, it will show me radical differences. So I have very little confidence in the PageSpeed Insights tool. Another one I use is Pingdom on occasion. Usually only when I get into a real sticky one, when I'm really having to tweak the dickens out of a heavy page. But I always use GTmetrix, Web Page Test, and Lighthouse.
Lighthouse.
I'll often add the security load time to that. So those are 4 I have high level of confidence in their output, and they have different ways of displaying their data. They all have a waterfall type where you can look at individual file impacts and get a quick visualization. And they typically don't disagree much. Sometimes the fact that one of them, and I have this a lot of times, GTmetrix might say this is a problem when webpagetestorg didn't see it as a problem. And that makes me go take a second look at that file, and I'll find out something that can be tweaked, because there may have been a higher level of sensitivity on GTmetrix part to that particular type of file. So, it's using multiple tools is always a plus.
Okay, and what do you like mostly when it comes to GTmetrix? Why do you use it? Because this is one of the questions our audience is asking.
I like GTmetrix. I like the way that they display the results. I started using webpagetestorg first, so I got used to their display. And so, I've heard a lot of people say that they find things easier to find on GTmetrix because they've been using it all along, and now they've looked at webpagetestorg. They got spoiled because GTmetrix, from a UI standpoint, I think did a nicer job on making it easy to get used to, easy to learn. And webpagetestorg is it was a little bit more of a learning curve. They give you some good drill down in GTmetrix as well. But it's displayed. It's a little bit more. What's the term I'm looking for? Intuitive, I guess I would call it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And our 4th question here: what is better between Lazyload and Infinity Scroll, especially for products this category page?
I would very, very aggressively shy away from an infinity scroll for that sort of a page. I'm not fond of it for most pages, unless it's a very small site, 5 or 6 pages, and you can get that entire thing down. You're definitely going to want to go to Lazyload if you're going to infinite scroll, but when you start looking at, if you've got 60 products, you're having to load a lot of things into that page before your first product description and image are going to display. So your initial is going to be very impactful. Now, you may be okay when you get down to product 12, because you've got the majority of your bulk is already loaded and functional, and now all you're worried about is that particular product. But initial page load, I think, is going to be heavily impacted when you're dealing with that sort of thing, because you're going to have many different files you're trying to download down through that page, many different calls. And that calls again is an issue there, because you're calling a lot of different images, you're calling a lot of different text blocks. Depends on the design criteria, what sort of platform you're using. But in most instances, again, I focus so heavily on WordPress side, I would be very leery of going infinite scroll on that.
Yes, as a good practice. And before going to the fun part of our webinar, just a small question as a summary of what we discussed today. Can you summarize your tips for our audience, and how do you believe, where do you believe that will go the future of the loading speed of websites when it comes to its improvements? Do you think that the machine learning someday will be involved there when it comes to how search engines will understand it? What are your beliefs, actually?
Well, before I touch on the machine learning part of your question, I would say that, in general, speed is going to continue to be important, and perhaps even more so for a while. But now, we're looking, for instance, 5G is probably just around the corner for mobile. So again, at what point does it become an issue? If your page will load in 700 milliseconds and my page loads in 1.5 seconds, will the average user care? Okay. I don't think that it's going to be, I don't think it's going to have an impact for either one of us. And as the ability of the networks and phones begins to be capable of handling more speed, I think that for you and I, as developers or SEOs, page speed will become somewhat less important. Now, looking at the other aspect, machine learning, I don't know that I see a connection there. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit, because I don't really see how that is going to affect us in terms of page load.
I mean, if do you believe that machine learning will be part of assessing a website quality in terms of the loading speed, and do you think that it will play a major role when it comes to assessing the site quality at all, even in the machine learning era? And how do you think this will be changed in the future? Do you see any changes when the machine learning will be implemented more aggressively into this area?
I think machine learning is definitely upon us. It's coming. It's developing very strongly, and I think it's going to become increasingly more important. Things like schema markup, for instance, I think are going to continue to yield tremendous benefits for us, and can help in rankings and searchability. But I really don't foresee any impact to machine learning to page load. I think that the two are. I don't see them coalescing at all. I see page loaders can become more important. Machine learning has certainly become drastically more important, and communicating. We're not looking at keywords anymore. We're looking at entities. We're not looking at so much the keywords and the content as we are the context. So it makes it more important, rather than hitting, let's not try to stuff 80 keywords onto a page. Let's try to find one and focus on it and make it obvious to the search engine what that page is about. So we're contextually focused. I think that's going to have an impact. And that's where schema markup can really come into play with machine learning, because if you have schema markup on a page on 6 different things, then you're confusing the search engine. It doesn't know what the page is about, which one dominates.
Yeah, so it's time for our fun part. And let's say thank you for being our guest today. Thanks for accepting our invitation. And thanks for sharing your really valuable knowledge and experience with us, because as you said, the loading speed will continue to be important when it comes to the good user experience, the good rankings. I would like to say at the same time, thank you to our sponsor called Serpact. Again, thanks to our team and to Doc Sheldon. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for sharing with us. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube. We will very soon announce our next guest in the next month. Again, thank you, Doc. Thank you, Doc, for being with us today, and for sharing your 60 minutes here with us.
Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for the great explanations and discussions. We will see you again in the next months. And see you, friends.